I'm Karen Eubank, senior columnist for CandysDirt.com, and this is Dallas Dirt. Today we have with us Michael Meadows, interim CEO of Dallas. Michael, what is it? Dallas Heritage? It's a long word.
Dallas County Heritage Society.
Okay, and we abbreviate it to?
Well, we do business as Old City Park.
Okay, but we have a DCHS.
DCHS.
That's a mouthful for everyone to say. So, we want to know, first of all, a lot of people out there don't even know about Old City Park.
Yeah.
It's like, what is Old City Park? So can you give us like an encapsulated version of what is Old City Park for someone who may just have moved here or
Sure.
lives in Frisco and doesn't even know it exists?
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of people who fall into that category. We've had a lot of in-migration, so a lot of people don't know the history. So Old City Park, the official name is actually City Park. It's still that way on the records, but it is affectionately known as Old City Park because it is Dallas's oldest public park. And it sits in the Cedars neighborhood. If you don't know where that is, it's really kind of like I-30 in between Harwood and Irvay. So we are just across the highway from Farmers Market. And that's how most people know us. There's also lots of great dive bars and restaurants.
Yeah, there are.
A lot of artists down in that area. In any case, the park was started in 1876. It has gone through many iterations. It was, if you really want to go back, we've actually got oak trees that go back to when the Cherokee Indians lived on that land. So that's one of the reasons they're known as Cherokee Oaks. And then it was also the first site of Dallas's freshwater, Browder Springs. In 1888, it became the first home of the Dallas Zoo. And I know that because I used to run the Dallas Zoological Society, so it was always part of my pitch that the Dallas Zoo started at Old City Park. The zoo didn't stay there long because the wolves apparently howled and the bears got out, and that apparently was problematic for the neighbors. So it has been many things since that time. But what most people know it of today's generation is as an old historic park with a lot of old historic buildings that date back between 1840 to 1910. The idea was that when the highway cut through Old City Park and kind of separated Old City Park from downtown Dallas, that there was a bunch of very well-intentioned ladies, all who started moving historic homes and buildings and businesses. And the idea of creating this kind of historic park that really told the story of what it was like to live in Dallas in those years. When those ladies started moving, and it started with Millermore, which is this large Greek revival, plantation house that the lieutenant governor of Texas lived in. And it used to be in Oak Cliff. And it was about to hit the wrecking ball. And so all of these women rallied around, moved this building over. They also moved over the Miller barn, which was the first place that the Miller family lived. And then other buildings followed. And the story goes, apparently one of the founders told one of my predecessors that the reason they chose that particular time period is that was before cars screwed everything up.
So it's a historic living park.
It is.
And we actually have people there that interact with school children, and children would come and learn about, how the animals, they would card the sheep and things like that.
That's correct. And I think the one thing I didn't say in my comments, but I probably need to add in here for everybody's edification, is that it was operated as a living history museum up until about 2 years ago.
So I've always maintained there's nothing like Old City Park.
There's nothing like it in Dallas, and I think you'd have to go to like Log Cabin Village in Fort Worth. But there's not a lot of them.
It's unique for Dallas.
Yeah.
So this entire situation of me writing about Old City Park started on social media when I happened to notice people getting very upset about Waylon and Willie leaving the park. And Waylon and Willie are donkeys, and they are beloved. And people started to go crazy and say, why are the donkeys leaving? And then, oh, it's not just the donkeys, the sheep are leaving, the chickens are leaving. So that set me to investigate, like, why are they leaving? What's going on? And maybe you can expand on what provoked them to take the animals out of the park and why it is a very interesting situation between three different entities taking care of the park.
Sure. Let me back up to the history. The idea was the city of Dallas, which didn't really know, from what I could gather, what to do with this park, which had kind of fallen into disrepair when the highway went through it, what to do with it. And so to have a group of civic boosters who were willing to invest in the park and turn it into this living history museum seemed like a really good idea for everybody. And so I'm not exactly sure at what point the division started to occur, because the contract was with the city of Dallas, but as the Office of Arts and Culture came up, which had more to do with our arts community and the museum community, you also had the Park and Recreation Department. And somewhere down the line, and I would say this is, if I was really going to criticize the city for any piece of it, it was this, is that they divided up responsibility for the park so that the Office of Arts and Culture was responsible for the buildings, which made sense because they were a museum, but then the grounds were going to be the responsibility of the park department. So whenever, in my experience, you do that with governmental entities, it has a tendency to create kind of like this, where the other is like, well, it's your fault, it's your responsibility.
A lot of finger pointing.
Yeah, and then the other thing that kind of happened in those contracts was, and again, I hate to bash on the city because I know there's good people there that are trying hard, but they always, the city attorneys always will insist on language that says, we will fund XYZ, which is what you would have agreed to in your deal with the city departments. But then they will insert, and this is the city attorneys who insert this, which is subject to the availability of funds. The reason for that is they will always tell you that the current council can't bind the future actions of a future council. But the problem with that is that it often sets up whoever they signed the contract with to not have the adequate level of funding that you thought you agreed to when you first cut the deal.
Right.
And I would say back in those years, I'm not sure that the Dallas County Heritage Society's board of directors was terribly concerned with all of that, because there was a robust historic preservation community, funding community. And there was also the buildings, once they've been put in place, were in good shape. You didn't have to invest a whole lot in it. But as it aged, that became a bit of the problem. Dallas County Heritage Society was basically hired kind of like an early privatization effort. So as we were running this living history museum, we had it was agreed that since so much of the life in North Texas back then was rural, that you were going to have live animals. Mm-hmm. And so they had sheep. There was also chickens back there. And then we had donkeys, who were the workhorses of farms back in those years. And one of the reasons we had donkeys was we also had carriages. And so the previous donkeys we had, Nip and Tuck, were trained so that they could pull those carriages and you could give carriage rides through the park. Problem was with Willie and Waylon, they did not respond well to that. Actually threw our animal manager off, and they was like, okay, that's it. We're not doing carriage rides. We can't afford the liability. But as we were preparing for this contract to end on May 26th of last year, and now it's actually been extended 1 year, so we will be leaving on May 26th, we asked the park department, what would you like to do about the animals? And their response was, we don't have the capacity to care for the animals. Right. So we would like, when we take over on May 27th, for the animals not to be there so that we don't have that responsibility. And so we have been working hard to move the animals to good, loving homes that will take good care of them. And that's what we did with Willie and Waylon. Right. We've moved the chickens. The sheep will go sometime middle of May, I believe.
Yeah. Michael, why, after the Heritage Society has been in the park for so many years and there's been this division of labor, why is it now going just to the Parks Department only? Sure.
Well, it's a little complicated, but I'll try and keep this very short. The short answer on that is that when Paul Dyer and Willis Winters and I were consulting, we felt like one of the biggest problems was the fact that there were two reporting organizations. There were two parts of the city that were responsible for it. Park and Recreation Department responsible for the grounds. They traditionally ran parks. And then Office of Arts and Culture, which did arts organizations. And since one of our recommendations was for Old City Park no longer to be a living history museum, but a public park that celebrated Dallas's history, we felt like it was much better for it to go back just to the Park and Recreation Department, and that was going to create more ownership and more direct responsibility responsibility for it.
Right. So a lot of what has been said on social media that I've brought up in my articles is, okay, we understand the animals are gone. We get it. They've gone to good homes, not being slaughtered as people have suggested. The buildings are not just vacant. They are filled with artifacts. There's a doctor's office, there's a blacksmith shop, and there's a home that looks exactly like a home you would have walked back into in the 1800s with beautiful wallpaper and beautiful furnishings. And these things have been donated and collected for years and years. And people are concerned about what's going to happen, not just to the buildings, but to the artifacts. And people are, they're like, my family donated. Do I get it back? What's going to happen? And so we're at this sort of collision course of, we still have 3 people running the show, but the Parks Department is going to take over, and they're not necessarily historians, nor are they program directors as far as historic things for children to learn. So do we know yet what's going to happen to those artifacts? Is the Dallas Heritage Society going to take them all? Will they be empty buildings?
So let me just start with a couple of facts. One, the city of Dallas, whenever you move a building onto city of Dallas property, the building becomes the property of the city of Dallas as well. However, the contents of those buildings, just like you would expect anytime you're in a rental situation, your property is still your property. And that's the case for all of the artifacts and all of the furnishings. Also, we've been an accredited museum. When you make a donation to a museum, it becomes part of the collection. And the donors sign documents that basically recognize that. Any decisions we make that we think are done in the best interests of the collection and who's going to be able to preserve them, take care of them, also provide public access to them so that they can still be viewed, that is well within our realm of responsibilities and ACCU, our fiduciary responsibility. So there are 22,000 items. Okay. There is a very large number of those items that are not on public view. That is not unusual for a museum. I think if you went to the Dallas Museum of Art, you'd find that they have a huge number of pieces that are nowhere within the public view. And that could be for lots of different reasons. What I will say is, I think first of all, we're most concerned with museum quality pieces. And those pieces are being placed. And by the way, it's not just furnishings. In some cases, it's actual documents. And so those are being placed at appropriate locations. And at our last board meeting, it was approved for some items were going to Preservation Texas, some of them were going to Preservation Dallas, some of them were going to the city's archives. The second part of it is, honestly, we're moving to be a different type of organization. We have been managing a park for 50 plus years. And we decided not to go out of business for a very specific reason. And we believed that if we went out of business, there would be no advocate organization or support organization specifically for Old City Park.
Right.
And I would like to see as many of those buildings stay. And so I wanted to make it as easy as possible to maintain those buildings over a long period of time.
Will there be an ability now to better market the park so people are aware of it and aware of?
That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, it's part of how we got here in the first place, and because I was brought in, as a consultant, and part of it was because they had been losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The society had, and when their executive director had left. They said, this is an opportunity, go back and tell us what you think we need to do. And so I gave them some initial recommendations and some thoughts. I mean, at the top of the list, what I'd say, and I'm sitting here looking at it, I mean, if you looked at the attendance between 2015 and 2019, that 5-year period, and I chose that time period because we were doing this in 2021, and I didn't think it was fair to include the COVID years. Yeah. But I mean, the average total attendance was 49,000 people a year, and 45% of that was school groups. And when you got down to who are the number of people who actually paid to come in, the $10, I think is about what it was to come in. I mean, we were averaging somewhere between 8,000 to 9,000 people a year. And I put that, and I said, let me just put that in the right perspective for you. That's a bad weekend at the Dallas Zoo.
Exactly.
And so people were voting with their feet and with their wallets at that time. And so that's when we kind of came in and I started looking at the whole situation. And part of it was, what was it costing them to run it? What was it costing them to have security? And there was, in my opinion, and actually that was shared by two former park directors, Paul Dyer and Willis Winters, that it would cost the park department, if it was just a park, probably 5 times what the city had been putting in to cover the maintenance, security, and what we were getting through the Office of Arts and Culture. And so it was at that point, it was like, well, maybe we need to go back and tell them that that's one of the issues. And so I believe that for the park to really flourish, it's impossible to run a very successful museum if you're having to spend money on things that you're supposed to be getting paid for. And that's what was happening, is we're paying a lot for security. We're paying a lot for all of these other items. And that was coming at the expense of programming, and it was coming at the expense of marketing.
And also that historic aspect is a draw in and of itself.
Absolutely.
For the park being all things to all people, but hey, we have this extra great, unique thing. So that begs the question of, we know what's going to happen. We know that we're getting a new convention center, we're getting a deck park, and there'll be a seamless flow at some point between the farmers market and Old City Park. That's 22 acres of prime real estate. I understand it's a park, but is there a world in which some of that land could be sold off and developed? That is a huge concern of the public right now.
I know it is, and as my understanding goes, that it's actually state law that if they were going to try and take dedicated parkland, which Old City Park is, that they would have to take it to the Dallas voters, who would have to approve the sale or use of it for anything other than a public park.
So there'd have to be a public referendum.
Every
referendum. Single citizen would have to
Exactly.
vote on it.
Yeah.
So the odds of that happening are very narrow. I would
Very
think.
narrow.
Right.
Very low.
But that also puts Old City Park in a unique position for the future, in that we are going to be part of downtown. The Cedars is being developed at a rapid pace. So what can be done to make Old City Park more vibrant, more of a neighborhood experience? There is, from my understanding, it's only one of 2 parks that has the ability to sell liquor, which is huge.
No, it's actually where you can
Or you
consume
can
liquor.
consume liquor, right?
It's interesting because there's actually, the contract is silent on whether or not we can sell it. So
Yeah.
every single time we're going to have a gala or anything where we're going to charge and serve alcohol, we have to go through the park department
Yeah.
in order to get permission to do
But
that.
it seems to me like if all of those buildings, let's just say there's a building where it's going to be emptied out because it's not that relevant. That could be a coffee shop for the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
The saloon could be a real saloon. But what's holding us
And that
back?
was, in fact, part of what Paul and
Right.
Willis and I were recommending, an adaptive reuse, because our feeling on it really was that if all you're going to do is keep a bunch of buildings filled up with old artifacts, looking at the demographics of our area, that was not going to be attractive.
Right.
That business model was gone. It may come back at some point, but it's so you really needed to think about it that way. As far as the development and everything, I do think the city is planning on doing a master planning process. And my hope is that they're going to be engaging all of the different stakeholders that you brought into this, because quite frankly, if the convention center and Visit Dallas and the farmers market, not just the Cedars neighborhood, but if they're not promoting the use of this park, it's going to have this attendance problem. And if you've got an attendance problem, then you're going to have a revenue problem, and you're also going to have difficulty getting investment from the city and from philanthropists, because everybody wants to support a winner.
Right. But it does seem like with this new plan of the deck park, that is going to be visible again. It's like we divided it, we cut it off
Right.
at one point, which we keep doing.
Right.
And then we go back years and years, decades later and say, yes, let's get rid of that highway that divided things. So we're going to do that. So it seems like it'll be more obvious what an asset it is, and that the buildings are not an impediment, that they are a unique draw for people to
Yeah.
come to the park, and they can still have picnics and they can still do things. And so I guess, where would the investment come from? Would it be private investment to say add a bride's room on, or add a catering, or
Okay, so now you're going to this is the part that you know that I've been most passionate about, which is I'm really sorry that Old City Park at this moment doesn't have a significant amount of bond dollars
Yes.
in the program. To me, that's very short-sighted, because they're going to go through this master planning process. They'll have a whole new what they want the park to be. And I'm going to assume that a large part of it's going to stay intact, but that'll be 2 years. By the time we're really probably talking about 2030 before a lot of these things happen. And so it's just unfortunate that there is not dollars available to invest in this interim period, because my concern is what's going to happen is they're going to get to 2030 and it's going to be in even worse condition unless there is a significant investment in the current facilities. So we'll have to wait and see. But I will also say, from talking with lots of philanthropists in town, they've been very straight with me and said, unless the city is going to invest in their own asset, I'm not putting my money in there.
Right. So
and
the
so
city has
it's
to show willing.
the best public-private partnerships, and I think we've seen it at UT Dallas, we've seen it at UT Southwestern, we've seen it at the Dallas Zoo, the Arboretum, et cetera, is if the city will invest in its own assets, or the state in those cases of UTs, then philanthropists will come in to provide the margin of excellence for, so that those facilities can go from being average, good, to outstanding.
Right.
Because Dallas supports winners.
So we have to ask the question, why in the largest bond package ever in the city's history was there no money for Old City Park? And we have to ask the city, what are you going to do with this asset? Because it is indeed an asset. So I guess...
And we've raised that question many times. I mean, I can't really speak to it. I know that there are a lot of things that they want to put money in the bond program for. And my hope is that before this thing goes up for the public vote, that there's going to be more allocated.
Michael, thank you so much for being with us today. We enjoyed talking to you and all of your insights into Old City Park. And we do hope for the best for the park. We love it. And we're just happy to have you here on Dallas Dirt. Thank you very much.